Hi, my name is Amanda Heyn and I'm the senior editor here at AOE, and today I want to talk about drawing. So we're going to talk about 10 secrets to decoding and developing your students' drawing skills. Now, before you go get a snack or think this is a good time to go to the bathroom, wait. This is not going to be like that lecture, your third year of college, where you sort of scribbled down pre-schematic and schematic and you didn't really know what it meant. I'm going to easily explain the stages and tell you how you can use them in your classroom. And actually, halfway through, I'm going to tell you something that might even shock you. So let's get started. Secret number one is that the stages fuse together, So, there's a lot of great books on the subject. I read pretty much all of them, so you didn't have to. If you'll see, I recommend them. There's a lot of good stuff in here. But I also created a lot of helpful guides, so you don't have to read them. But what you'll notice, if you do, is that different age ranges are given. And it's important to note that stages can overlap. And in first grade, you might have someone still drawing like a 5-year-old and someone drawing like a 9-year-old, and that's all very normal. The second thing to note about the stages fusing together is that the progression is always the same, but the rate can change. So for example, a first grader might blow through one of the stages all in one school year, whereas another kid might take 3 school years to get through that stage. However, they're both going to do the stages in the same level. And then just a quick note is that kids draw at their mental age. So if you have a student with cognitive disabilities, let's say he's 14 years old, but cognitively he's around age 9, he is going to draw like a 9-year-old. Kind of interesting and something good to keep in mind when you're working with those students with special needs. The second secret is that drawing is more than representation. And we know this, right? But it bears keeping in mind when we're looking at a drawing that not only might it be what the student is thinking about or what they're seeing, but it might encompass something the student is feeling. So super hard scribbly lines may not mean the student is in the scribbling stage. It just might mean they're really mad. Or I know you guys have seen this if you've taught elementary. There's a kid and he has 2 markers and he's going, "Arr! And you look at it and you think, oh my gosh, what is this? This looks kind of really messy. But if you talk to the kid about it, it's an action drawing, right? He's acting something out. So that's another thing that you might want to look for when you're trying to decide what stage someone is in. Secret 3, and probably the biggest secret in this first section, is that the stages are not as complicated as you think. So, of course, when you're pre-schematic and schematic and pseudo-natural, what does that all mean? I've broken it down to one sentence for each stage that's going to help you remember them. So here they are. Scribbling stage, kids scribble. Done. Pre-schematic, kids are trying to represent things. So here's where that infamous tadpole man comes in. You're starting to sort of recognize things. Schematic is that kids have symbols for different objects. Here you're going to see the corner sun. Pre-realism or the gang age, that means like, hey gang, let's go, gang of friends, not that there's third graders, creating chaos in your city and going to jail. That's not what I mean. Anyway, that is when kids are trying to make things look real, but often are failing. And we're going to talk about that. That's a very important stage. The pseudo-naturalistic, or realism stage, as I like to call it, kids are able to make things look pretty real. They're really kind of getting the hang of drawing. And then the decision stage, or the decision-making stage, is where kids, these are your high schoolers, so kids are able to have their own feelings about art and are able to master skills so that they can really represent and really communicate what they want to through drawing. So that's a really exciting stage to work with. All right, so I just wanted to make you aware this is here for download. This goes into much more detail about each stage if you're interested, or so you can target in on the stages that you teach. But really, secret number 4 is that you don't need to remember all of that stuff to try to figure out a stage. You really need to remember 2 things: observe people and observe placement. And I'm going to show you those things right now. All right, so we're zoomed in nice and close here, and we're going to kind of go through people and placement for each stage. Scribbling, obviously there are no people, there is no placement. Pre-schematic, this would be your early childhood. People, tadpole man, sort of look like people. Placement, all over the place. No real organization to the space, like this child's version of a farm. Moving on to the schematic stage, this would kind of be when you start to see them in school. So kindergarten through maybe third-ish grades sometimes. That's on the upper end of things, of course. Development of a baseline for space. Sometimes you see that blue line across the sky. You're definitely going to see the corner sun, and every single thing is on that baseline. As far as people go, there is a formula. You can see this is how the girl draws a shirt. This is how a girl draws pants. This is how the girl draws eyes. So it's a very formulaic approach. These are symbols for people. The pre-realism stage gets a little bit more interesting with the exploration of depth, and kids will do this naturally. So we can see a baseline here, but there's a little bit more. There's some things in between the baselines, like this slide and this object right here. People still kind of formulate. They still sort of look like each other, but they're getting to be a little bit more in proportion. The pseudo-naturalistic or realism stage is your middle schoolers most typically, and these kids, people are getting limbs, they're getting elbows, they're getting joints, they're much more in proportion, and as far as the space goes, they're really attempting perspective here. So you'll see, the floorboards are slanted and the couch is sort of drawn in a perspective. So that would be some clues for that stage. And then, of course, the decision-making stage, they can wildly vary. They can definitely do perspective. The people are going to be a lot more naturalistic. And you might notice that the people are really engaged. They're making facial expressions, or their poses are much more interesting. So just a higher level of drawing a person, obviously. And like I said, this picture doesn't show space specifically, but these kids would be ready to learn perspective drawing. Okay, so we're going to go through our fifth secret about decoding, and that is to observe the student's attitude toward their drawing instead of the drawing itself. And generally in earlier stages, the scribbling and the pre-schematic and the schematic, kids are all about sharing their work with you. They want to tell you about that rainbow cat they drew. In the later stages, as soon as they hit that pre-realistic stage, they are done. That's when they're in that mental crisis and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't draw, and they just sort of shut down. So if a kid all of a sudden becomes really unwilling to share with you, that might be an indicator that they're going through that mental shift. And then generally that continues and can continue all the way through high school. They're not really open to sharing. All right, here's where I drop the hammer. So all of the research says that this development is going to happen regardless of whether you teach it or not. When I heard that, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to hang up my apron, see you later. But really, it's, a teaching art is so much more about than just about drawing. And in addition, there are things that you can do to work with kids where they're at that we're going to talk about. But gosh, isn't that interesting? It's just like language acquisition, right? You don't sit down with your 2-year-old and say, now, Timmy, we are going to learn how to talk today, right? You just don't do that. It just sort of happens. And it's much the same with drawing skills. So students will actually develop from the scribbling stage all the way through the realism stage with no help from an adult. And this is true across cultures, across the globe, with formal education, without formal education, and formal education of teaching kids how to draw in these different specific ways to try to get them to draw ahead of their level. They don't really make any difference, which is really, really interesting. So let's talk about what you can do. How can you work with your kids? How can you develop their drawing skills? So secret number 7 is that students mimic our values, and you can actually get kids to draw above their grade level quite easily if you tell them to do something. Now, I'm super guilty of this. When I was in the classroom, this is an example of a first grade project. It's a color wheel creature, and I made the kids color the whole sky because I thought, well, that's going to look nicer. Little did I know that actually most of them would just rather put the blue line across the top of the sky because that's how they perceive it. And what's really interesting is that neither one is really wrong, right? If you think about where the sky is, it never actually touches the ground. And so they are perceiving it at the top of their paper, and that's just how their brains work. So the important takeaway here from this secret is to teach skills when students are ready to learn the info. And again, the tools that I'm going to give you at the end are going to really help you hone in on when that might be. Secret number 8 is that judging can harm. So when you talk to students about their work, like if I was going to talk to, here's a picture by sweet little Vivian, sweetest kid ever. And if Vivian were to come come to me with this picture and I would have said, oh, Vivian, your things aren't on the baseline and you did not draw all the squares of the checkerboard and, suns aren't really in the corner, that can really stifle Vivian's creativity and stifle her natural drawing development. So it's really important to create sort of a natural conversation about the artwork instead of going right to judging. This can also fix the do you like my art syndrome, because if every time a kid brings you a drawing and you say, you need to fix this, this, and this, that kid is going to keep coming back every time they do a step and saying, do you like my art? Is this good? Is this good? Am I done? Am I done? Right? You have those kids. Taking a step back might actually help the problem. The ninth secret is that praise can also harm. And this is really tricky because we all want to tell kids that they're wonderful and great and, talented. But having an honest conversation or a real conversation about the artwork is much more meaningful. So, for example, instead of saying, oh, you drew a beautiful bowl of fruit, that's the best bowl of fruit I have ever seen, you can say, wow, I really like how you noticed the colors. I really see how you noticed that the red of the watermelon was different than the red of the apple. Wow, you really put some interesting designs on your bowl. Things like that are going to be much more meaningful to kids and also help from creating that dependence on praise to move on to the next step. And then the last secret is that skill does not necessarily equal creativity. So here's a wonderful example. This little girl, phenomenal craftsmanship. This is a kindergarten paper mache book. Not the most creative kid in the class. She was more worried about pleasing. And so stifled kids are your copiers. Those are the kids, if you use teacher samples, who are copying your every single move. They are erasing over and over and over. And so the thing to note about those kinds of kids is that drawing can actually help them develop their own skills, right? If you take a step back and let their skills progress naturally, they're going to be much more creative. So, like I said, I could talk for this